the Fantasy Source Baseball Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with Matt Lutovsky, and today we are talking about averages, and not just batting averages, but the average starters in 12-team standard fantasy baseball leagues. Reason why we're doing this is because I feel, at least, that it's been long overdue for us to address the issue of what is fantasy relevant, what is fantasy average, because it's a completely different thing than real-life baseball.
Yes, and we have this tool on our site for Fantasy Source subscribers where you can look at the positional averages, each position, and look at what average production is for a starter in a 12-team league. And that's key to say starter because as we get into it, you'll see kind of the word average is, has to be loosely applied. But, we have it for AL only, NL only, and mixed leagues, and it's kind of interesting to see who's considered an average starter, and it might change your perceptions a little bit.
Now, for instance, among catchers, where very few leagues there are backup catchers stashed away on rosters and so on, this basically is the average of the fantasy-relevant catchers that are out there. And then for positions like first base, where a lot of extra first basemen get drafted for utility positions or stashed away on benches just as they're sluggers, you might need to apply a little bit of common sense to this. But among the top 12 starting first basemen in a standard league, that's what we mean. So let's actually start with the first baseman, because they are generally the best hitting players on the field.
Yes, and the first baseman, what I did when I went through this is I just looked at the numbers, what the average was and homers and all that, and I tried to find the guy I thought would fit that criteria the best, and then ultimately I just looked at what his 5x5 roto rating was, and then found the guy who most closely corresponded. And at first base, the average first baseman is somewhere between Ben Zobrist and Mark Teixeira.
Ben Zobrist.
Yes.
As in the middle infielder Ben Zobrist.
Right, and that's the thing, most people don't play him at first base. But that sounds crazy. I think if you ask anyone in general, would you rather have Mark Teixeira or Ben Zobrist, everyone would say Mark Teixeira.
Right.
But his average is really low, and that obviously brings down his overall ranking.
You know what's amazing about that is that off the top of my head, I would say most people would say to themselves, "Oh yeah, I'd much rather have Ben Zobrist than let's say some random first baseman who's in the bottom half of the 12 there."
Right.
Come up with one for me.
Billy Butler, maybe.
Billy Butler.
Yeah.
Okay, bottom half of the top 12, but still probably starting in your lead at first base. Either him or Ben Zobrist. If you've got every other position filled up, you might tell yourself, no, I'd rather have Billy Butler, because he's got to be, I know the positions and everything are set up, but Zobrist is just plain out hitting them.
Yeah, and he does it across 5 categories, and that's the big thing we see when we look at roto rating and how much more valuable a couple, you can be under the positional average in runs and ribbies by a little, but if you're over in stolen bases by a couple, it's going to inflate your rating. Because, stolen bases are at a bit of a more of a premium.
So what makes the top guys at first base better than Mark Teixeira? Are they across the board better, or do they, like you say, they have something going for them?
It's batting average with Teixeira. I mean, that's why he's down. He's among the league leaders in homers, got a ton of ribbies, but he's hitting 240. And that's something that's going to take value away from him and make him an average starting first baseman, so basically about the 6th, 7th best first baseman.
Let's work our way around the diamond to second baseman and who the average fantasy starting second baseman is there.
It's right in between Michael Kadire and Neil Walker.
Now, Neil Walker's interesting because I seem to recall you wrote a piece earlier this year where you were talking about, is Neil Walker a must-start at this point in the season? And you know what? If he's a perfectly average fantasy second baseman, he kind of has to be.
Yeah, and his big thing, he's got a couple steals. He's one of these a little bit of everything kind of guys. Not great anywhere, but solid. And really, he's probably the definition of average when you think about it.
I mean, maybe Kadire is a little bit more exciting because he has second base eligibility, but he plays elsewhere.
Right, he's got some pop, too. You gravitate toward homers.
And that sort of thing. But Walker is definitely the epitome of boring but good.
Yes.
Just because he's boring doesn't mean he's not useful.
Exactly. And going to third base, this is interesting. We go to New York. It's right in between Daniel Murphy and Alex Rodriguez.
I saw the Daniel Murphy thing the other day and just blew my mind. It blew my mind. He's right he had such a good season,
He really
under
did.
the radar, hitting way over 300, and that in and of itself, kind of like Pablo Sandoval a couple of years ago, gave him a lot of value.
Yeah, exactly. And, again, to put Daniel Murphy on the same level with A-Rod, people think that's crazy. But keep in mind, A-Rod's missed a lot of games. Obviously, Murphy is now, but he was healthy earlier. And that's just another example of how overall value, taking season-long value, it's, you might be surprised by what you find out.
What about shortstop? What are you seeing there?
Shortstop's interesting because the average shortstop...
By the way, all of them are interesting.
Yes, but the average shortstop has 15 stolen bases.
Average?
But the guy who ranks out as the most average shortstop has 1, and that's Johnny Peralta.
Oh.
But the reason he ranks out as average is because he has some extra homers. He's got more homers than a lot of these guys, a few more ribbies. He's hitting 300. So that makes up for his lack of steals. So he doesn't fit the criteria across the board of, 12 homers, 56 RBIs, 15 steals. But overall, his overall fantasy performance is average among starting shortstops.
Tying into a conversation that we had a while back as far as what you're aiming for down the stretch in fantasy, if you can swing a trade for another sort of average shortstop, I don't know who we have listed there who was also close, but one of those guys for Peralta, you're giving up the steals, but if you're behind in home runs,
Right.
RBIs, runs, like that might be something that you would look into and
Yeah.
try to find an inefficiency there.
And that's the interesting thing, especially middle infield positions and shortstop especially, is it seems to be all or nothing. Like, there's this Drupal Cabrera, and he gives you some of both, and that's great. But for the most part, it's either a guy with 16 steals and 3 homers, or a guy with 3 steals and 16 homers.
Now-
Pick your poison.
In the outfield, there's just such a much wider pool of players.
Yep.
Some leagues have 5, some leagues have 3 outfielders. Whichever one you're in, it's a huge pool of players. So the top tier guys are going to be way better than the average players because they're going to be a bunch of guys at the bottom of the pool that are starting and are regularly starting. They just aren't that good. It's just that's who they are.
Right, exactly. And according to Roto Rating again, the average outfielders, it's right between Carlos Beltran and Nelson Cruz. And again, we have to factor in missed time there, and I'm sure that's part of it because Nelson Cruz is an elite slugger when he's going good, but he's really not running this year. And people maybe don't realize that, and you kind of see across the board production is kind of And
Of course, this is also taking into account if you just left Cruz in there the entire time.
Right.
Whereas if you're being reasonable and
Right.
you're sentient, you have Cruz in there, and then when he's hurt, you take him out and put some random other
Right.
person.
So you're getting better than average production overall, but just on the surface, that's what those guys have done.
What are you seeing from the catchers?
Catcher is, that's the most down position, and Yadier Molina rated out as the most average. And, I thought it was going to be Matt Wieters or Miguel Montero. They're actually slightly below. So
why is that based on their line stats that you're seeing?
Well, I think the big thing with them, the average, surprisingly, there's a couple catchers at the top that are really inflating average, like Victor Martinez and these guys. So the average for catchers is 277, which seems high.
Yeah, it does.
But
even for 12, just 12 catchers.
But, you got McCann, you got Vic Martinez, you got some of these guys kind of inflating average. So Wieters, Montero, they're both under that, and I think that kind of brings them down a little bit overall.
So again, if you're looking to maybe exploit an inefficiency moving forward, and catcher, there isn't that much to be gained in the power departments, but it seems that batting average might be something you might be able to go for.
And Molina, our average guy, he's hitting 292, so he's an above average catcher.
Right, and his power stats, what is that? Is that 11 home runs?
11 homers.
Like, just going straight up against someone like Wieters, who has 13 home runs, it might seem like he matches up perfectly favorably, but then that batting average, you've got to understand, might make him that much more valuable to you.
Depending what you need, exactly.
Yeah. So then, I guess the next thing is relief pitchers.
Yeah. Well, reliever's tough because, you got saves. That's just kind of a mess. But the guy who rated out closest most average among closers is Jordan Walden.
That just sounds right. I don't know
Yeah,
why.
it kind of is. I mean, he actually has fewer Ks than I thought he'd have. He kind of just...
Because he throws 98 miles per hour.
Right.
You think he's got to be mowing guys
And
down.
he has more saves than the average, but everything else is just like almost right in line with what the average stats are for a closer.
And then starting pitchers.
Starting pitcher Sean Markham rated out most
Again,
average.
that just sounds like, he'd probably be like
And
a
he's
14th
almost
round pick.
exactly like, listen to these stats. So the average starting pitcher has a 3.24 ERA, Markham 3.38, a 1.16 WHIP, Markham 1.13, 137 strikeouts, Markham 131. 10 wins, Markham 11. Like, he's right there. It's almost too perfect.
Well, if anything, that kind of tells you just how good fantasy pitchers are compared to the general population. That really, like, if you're in real life Major League Baseball and you're hey, heaven forbid that we've got real life general managers listening to this, and we have to give them this advice. But you're not going to get Sean Markham as an average pitcher. He's a well above average real life pitcher.
Yes, exactly, and that's why you kind of have to alter your thinking in fantasy, and some people don't, and that's why they get passed.
Yeah, and they just settle for the guy who's the fourth starter somewhere at some random team and just isn't good.
Right, exactly.
So, all right, anything else you want to add?
No, just, hey, make sure to check out the Positional Averages page. We have a lot of good tools like this that can help you not only in season, but preparing for next season.
All right, Matt, thanks for joining me.
All right.